In the world of political intrigue and legal battles, few names have loomed as large as Rudy Giuliani. Once heralded as America's mayor for his leadership following the September 11th attacks, Giuliani's descent into controversy has been just as public and dramatic. Recently, he's found himself in the middle of yet another contentious story, this time involving his longtime ally, Kash Patel, and the FBI. Patel, a former national security official and staunch supporter of former President Donald Trump, has been making headlines of his own. In early 2025, he was confirmed as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, a role that marked a significant shift for the agency. His rise to this powerful position was not without controversy. Patel, who had worked as a key figure in Trump's administration, was seen by many as a partisan choice for a position that traditionally calls for impartiality. His ties to Trump and his involvement in several contentious national security matters raised alarms among Democrats and some Republicans. For Giuliani, however, Patel's ascent represented more than just a shift in the FBI's leadership. It was the culmination of a long-standing frustration with the agency and its treatment of Trump allies. Rudy had often accused the FBI of political bias, particularly during investigations into his own activities. The former mayor's involvement in several legal disputes, including his role in the aftermath of the 2020 election, had put him on the radar of federal authorities. Giuliani has been vocal in his dissatisfaction with the FBI's focus on him and Trump's circle, viewing the agency's investigations as politically motivated. As Kash Patel was confirmed as FBI director, Giuliani's dissatisfaction with the agency's direction was palpable. The former mayor began openly complaining about the growing divide between the FBI and Trump loyalists, including himself. The tension seemed to reach a breaking point when Giuliani claimed that Patel, despite his loyalty to Trump, was not doing enough to push back against what he saw as a deep state within the FBI. Giuliani's frustration was further exacerbated by reports that the FBI had distanced itself from him, with agents failing to return his calls or respond to his inquiries. These frustrations were not limited to Giuliani alone. Many in Trump's circle were disillusioned with the FBI's perceived bias against them. During his presidency, Trump had frequently railed against the FBI, accusing the agency of being part of a broader witch hunt. For Giuliani, Patel's leadership was supposed to usher in a new era of accountability at the FBI, but instead he found himself feeling sidelined. Despite his growing discontent, Giuliani remained a vocal supporter of Trump, continuing to echo the president's rhetoric about the need to overhaul federal institutions. Giuliani's public complaints about Patel, however, revealed a deeper conflict: the divide between loyal Trump supporters and the institutions that were supposed to serve all Americans impartially. As the situation unfolded, the media took note. Giuliani's grievances against the FBI and Patel became a central theme in his public persona. His claims that the FBI was targeting him for his political views and affiliations were broadcast widely across conservative outlets, fueling further polarization. To many Trump supporters, Giuliani's complaints were a signal of a deeper issue: the FBI's alleged role in undermining the president's allies. But as Giuliani continued to voice his dissatisfaction, questions began to emerge. Was his discontent with the FBI truly about institutional bias? Or was it about his personal entanglements with the law? The former mayor's legal woes were numerous, ranging from accusations of election interference to ongoing investigations into his business dealings. His relationship with the FBI was, at best, complicated. Giuliani's ongoing media appearances, in which he criticized both the FBI and the Biden administration, painted a picture of a man who felt betrayed by the very system he had once sworn to uphold. The rise of Kash Patel, and his subsequent confirmation as FBI director, added a new layer of complexity to Giuliani's narrative. The former mayor's complaints about the FBI and its handling of his case were not just about personal grievances. They were part of a larger political narrative. For Giuliani, the battle was no longer just about defending his actions. It was about defending a vision of a more loyal, more politically aligned FBI. Patel's ascension to the top of the bureau had become a flashpoint for Giuliani, who felt that the FBI's leadership under Patel was a missed opportunity to clean house and restore Trump's allies to their rightful places. Kash Patel's rise to the position of FBI director is a story steeped in both political ambition and controversy. As a former National Security Council (NSC) official under President Donald Trump, Patel had gained a reputation as a staunch ally of the former president. His role in the administration's defense efforts, including his support for Trump's efforts to challenge the outcome of the 2020 election, made him a polarizing figure. But it was Patel's relationship with the former president and his perceived loyalty to Trump that catapulted him into the limelight and ultimately into the role of FBI director. Patel's confirmation process was far from smooth. The Senate confirmation hearings were a battleground, with fierce opposition from Democrats who viewed him as an agent of political cronyism. They argued that Patel's history of working closely with Trump and his outspoken partisan views would undermine the FBI's reputation as a neutral and independent agency. Critics also raised concerns about Patel's qualifications for such a high-profile role, pointing to his previous work as a congressional aide and his tenure as a defense official, which many felt were not enough to prepare him for the complexities of leading the nation's premier law enforcement agency. However, Patel had one powerful ally, Donald Trump. The former president's unwavering support for Patel during the confirmation process helped push him over the finish line. Trump's endorsement of Patel as the next FBI director was a clear signal that the president believed the agency needed to be reshaped in his image. To Trump and his supporters, Patel represented a figure who could be trusted to root out what they saw as corruption within the FBI. They believed that Patel, with his ties to Trump's inner circle, would bring the necessary changes to an agency they saw as being tainted by political bias. For Trump loyalists like Rudy Giuliani, Patel's confirmation was seen as a victory. However, this victory was not without complications. Despite Patel's close association with Trump, he was not seen by everyone in the president's camp as an unwavering ally. Giuliani, in particular, began to express concerns about Patel's commitment to the cause. As the new FBI director, Patel had the opportunity to make changes, but his actions were beginning to suggest a more pragmatic approach than many Trump supporters had hoped for. One of the first signs of tension came when Patel declined to take direct action against what Giuliani and others saw as deep state actors within the FBI. Despite his reputation as a hardline Trump supporter, Patel's leadership style appeared more restrained than expected. He was cautious in dealing with the ongoing investigations into Trump's associates, choosing to focus more on traditional law enforcement issues, such as counterterrorism and organized crime, rather than taking a partisan stance on the ongoing investigations into Trump's presidency. This cautious approach was not well received by everyone. Giuliani, in particular, felt that Patel's reluctance to aggressively target Trump's political enemies was a sign of weakness. The former mayor's complaints began to take center stage in the media as he openly criticized Patel for not doing enough to defend Trump's allies or challenge the FBI's investigations into the former president's inner circle. Giuliani's frustration was not only with Patel's leadership style but also with his perceived lack of loyalty to Trump's vision of the FBI. The former mayor had been a vocal advocate for a complete overhaul of the agency, pushing for a more aggressive stance against what he viewed as biased investigations and politically motivated actions. To Giuliani, Patel's appointment to the top post at the FBI was supposed to signal a new era of accountability and transparency. Instead, he felt that Patel was simply another bureaucrat unwilling to take the bold steps necessary to change the FBI from within. Giuliani's criticisms were amplified by his own legal troubles, which seemed to grow more complicated with each passing month. As the investigations into his actions following the 2020 election deepened, Giuliani found himself at odds with federal authorities, particularly the FBI. The former mayor had become one of the most high-profile targets of federal investigations, and his public dissatisfaction with the agency's handling of his case seemed to intensify as Patel's leadership continued. In interviews and media appearances, Giuliani lashed out at the FBI, claiming that the agency was politically biased and targeting him unfairly. He argued that Patel, despite his close ties to Trump, was not doing enough to defend him or his allies. Giuliani's growing sense of betrayal was evident in his public statements, where he lamented the FBI's lack of support for Trump's supporters. He even went as far as accusing Patel of not following through on promises to purge the FBI of what he described as deep state actors. At the heart of Giuliani's grievances was a belief that the FBI had become an instrument of political warfare used by Democrats and establishment figures to target those who were aligned with Trump. Giuliani's accusations were part of a broader narrative within Trump's base, which saw the FBI as an enemy of the people, a powerful institution bent on taking down the former president and his supporters. As Rudy Giuliani's public criticism of the FBI under Kash Patel's leadership intensified, the rhetoric became increasingly harsh. Giuliani, who had once been a respected figure in American politics, found himself increasingly alienated from not just the FBI but from a number of his former allies. The divide between Trump loyalists and the broader political establishment continued to widen, with Giuliani positioning himself as a vocal champion for those who felt betrayed by the system. Giuliani's criticisms of Patel were not just confined to media interviews and social media posts. The former mayor began to frame his grievances in the context of a larger struggle, one that pitted Trump loyalists against the so-called deep state within the U.S. government. He argued that the FBI, under Patel's leadership, had failed to act in the interests of the American people. Instead, it was engaged in a politically motivated crusade against Trump and his supporters. In a series of interviews with conservative outlets, Giuliani accused Patel of becoming too complacent with the FBI's institutional biases. According to Giuliani, Patel's initial promise to reform the FBI had been undermined by his reluctance to challenge the agency's entrenched bureaucratic interests. This accusation struck a nerve with many in Trump's camp, who had hoped Patel would be the figure to carry out the purges of what they saw as politically motivated officials within the FBI. But as Patel's leadership continued, it became clear that he was not going to pursue the kind of aggressive actions that Giuliani had hoped for. Patel's focus remained on maintaining the operational integrity of the FBI, dealing with national security threats, and preventing terrorism. While these were critical issues, they did not align with the immediate political objectives of many Trump supporters who wanted to see more direct action against what they perceived as the FBI's bias against their movement. For Giuliani, this was a major disappointment. Patel's efforts to distance himself from political influence and focus on the FBI's core functions were seen by some as a failure to deliver on the promises made during his confirmation. Giuliani, who had been an ardent supporter of Trump's claims of a rigged system, felt that Patel was not using his position to push back against the perceived political attacks on the president and his allies. In this sense, Patel's approach to leadership at the FBI seemed too cautious and too aligned with the status quo for Giuliani's taste. But it wasn't just Giuliani who expressed frustration. A significant portion of Trump's base began to question Patel's loyalty. While his appointment had been celebrated by many conservative figures, the lack of tangible action soon led to doubts about his commitment to the cause. For Trump's supporters, who had been emboldened by years of accusations of a deep state conspiracy, Patel's reluctance to take bold steps was seen as a-b. But it wasn't just Giuliani who expressed frustration. A significant portion of Trump's base began to question Patel's loyalty. While his appointment had been celebrated by many conservative figures, the lack of tangible action soon led to doubts about his commitment to the cause. For Trump's supporters, who had been emboldened by years of accusations of a deep state conspiracy, Patel's reluctance to take bold steps was seen as a betrayal. They believed that Patel, a figure who had risen through the ranks thanks to his loyalty to Trump, was now failing to return that loyalty in full measure. As Giuliani's critiques of Patel became louder, his calls for a change in direction at the FBI grew more intense. He argued that the agency's focus should not just be on counterterrorism and organized crime, but also on taking down those within the government who had used the FBI for political purposes. Giuliani's rhetoric became a rallying cry for those who believed that the FBI had overstepped its bounds and was targeting Trump's allies for purely political reasons. His frustrations with Patel were also seen as a reflection of his broader disillusionment with the Republican establishment, which he believed had failed to adequately defend Trump and his supporters. Giuliani's public campaign against the FBI and Patel was a clear indication that his role in the political arena was shifting. Once a central figure in Trump's legal team and a key proponent of his policies, Giuliani now found himself battling on multiple fronts. His legal troubles, which had been mounting for years, combined with his increasingly bitter feud with the FBI, placed him in a precarious position. Many of his former allies began to distance themselves from him, concerned that his public attacks on Patel and the FBI could harm the broader political movement that Trump had cultivated. This divide between Giuliani and other Trump loyalists was not just about ideology. It was about power and influence. Giuliani had always been a forceful personality, but as his legal issues grew more complicated, his political capital waned. His complaints about Patel and the FBI seemed to fall on deaf ears in many circles, especially as the former mayor's personal troubles took center stage. Some began to question whether Giuliani's public outbursts were motivated more by his own grievances than by any genuine desire to see the FBI reformed. Yet, despite the growing distance between him and some of Trump's allies, Giuliani remained a vocal critic of the FBI and Patel's leadership. His willingness to continue attacking the agency, even at the cost of alienating those around him, was a sign of his deep frustration. Giuliani felt that the fight for control of the narrative was one that he had to win, not just for Trump but for himself. His personal and political battles were now inextricably linked, and his critique of Patel and the FBI became a key part of his strategy for regaining relevance in the public eye. As Giuliani's criticism of Kash Patel escalated, the political fallout became more pronounced. The media quickly latched onto the feud, turning it into a larger narrative of division within Trump's inner circle. Giuliani, once a prominent figure in American politics, now found himself at the center of a media firestorm. His attacks on Patel, an ally of his former boss, President Donald Trump, painted a portrait of discord and dysfunction in the ranks of the Trump loyalists. The media frenzy surrounding Giuliani's comments was fueled by the intense political environment of the time. As the U.S. grappled with the aftermath of the 2020 election and the ongoing legal battles of Trump and his allies, the stakes were high. Giuliani, as one of Trump's most vocal defenders, had long been a central figure in the fight against the FBI's investigation into the former president's activities. But now his outspoken critique of Patel threatened to further complicate Trump's legal and political battles. For many in the media, Giuliani's criticisms of Patel became the latest chapter in the ongoing saga of Trump's war with the establishment, particularly the FBI. The public feud between the two men was seen as emblematic of a larger rift within the Trump movement. Some saw it as an inevitable fallout between two powerful figures who had once been allies but had now found themselves at odds over strategy and loyalty. Others viewed it as a reflection of Giuliani's personal struggles, which had become more public as his legal woes mounted. Giuliani's media appearances, in which he continued to attack Patel for not doing enough to protect Trump's interests, only added fuel to the fire. He portrayed Patel as a disappointment to Trump's supporters, accusing him of failing to take action against the deep state and allowing the FBI to continue its investigations into the Trump campaign and his associates. For Giuliani, this was a fight not just for his own political survival, but for the future of the movement he had helped build. As the media coverage of the feud spread, it became clear that the battle between Giuliani and Patel was also about much more than just the FBI. It was about the broader struggle for control of the narrative surrounding Trump's presidency and the forces that had worked to undermine it. Giuliani's frustrations with Patel were rooted in a belief that the FBI was not only acting against Trump but was actively working to undermine the legitimacy of the entire movement that had coalesced around him. The media's portrayal of the feud also reflected the polarization of the American political landscape. On one hand, conservative outlets and Trump supporters sided with Giuliani, echoing his complaints about Patel's lack of action against the FBI. For them, Patel's failure to challenge the agency's actions was seen as a betrayal. On the other hand, more liberal media outlets focused on Giuliani's increasingly erratic behavior and legal troubles, painting him as a man desperate to stay relevant in a world where his political influence was rapidly fading. For Trump, the feud between Giuliani and Patel added yet another layer of complexity to his already tumultuous political and legal situation. The former president, who had once relied on Giuliani as his personal attorney and confidant, now had to navigate a growing divide between two men he had trusted. While Trump had always valued loyalty, it seemed that loyalty was no longer enough to maintain unity within his inner circle. Patel, despite the mounting pressure from Giuliani and other critics, tried to maintain a low profile, focusing on his responsibilities as FBI director. However, the tensions surrounding him were difficult to ignore. As the head of one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the country, Patel's actions were under intense scrutiny. His every move was being analyzed, not just by the media but by the Trump base, which had expected him to take a hardline stance against what they saw as political persecution. The FBI itself became embroiled in the controversy. Some of the agency's critics, including Giuliani, used the situation to further their narrative that the FBI was politically biased and out of control. Meanwhile, others pointed to Patel's leadership as evidence of the agency's attempt to return to normalcy and professionalism after years of political infighting. The debate over Patel's tenure as FBI director became a microcosm of the larger political and cultural battles playing out in the United States, where every action and decision was viewed through a partisan lens. While Giuliani's public attacks on Patel continued to dominate the media, the former mayor's legal problems were escalating as well. He faced a growing list of investigations into his activities surrounding the 2020 election, including his role in spreading baseless claims of election fraud. These legal challenges made Giuliani's position even more precarious, as many of his former allies distanced themselves from him. As the political landscape shifted, Giuliani's role as a central figure in the Trump movement began to erode. The focus on his feud with Patel, combined with his own personal and legal difficulties, placed him on the fringes of the political stage. For many, Giuliani had gone from being one of Trump's most loyal defenders to a divisive figure whose credibility was increasingly in question. As Rudy Giuliani's vocal criticisms of Kash Patel continued to reverberate across the media and political landscape, the long-term consequences for Trump's movement were becoming clearer. The split between these two figures, once united by a common cause, highlighted a deeper rift within the Republican Party and Trump's inner circle. The fallout from Giuliani's attacks on Patel and the FBI would go far beyond personal grievances. It would have lasting effects on the broader dynamics of Trump's base, the Republican Party, and the national political discourse. One of the key consequences of this public battle was the way it exposed the underlying fractures within the Trump movement. For years, Trump had presented himself as the leader of a populist revolution, one that sought to upend the established political order and fight back against what he and his supporters saw as a corrupt and biased system. Central to this narrative was the idea that Trump and his allies, including figures like Giuliani and Patel, were the only ones willing to take on the deep state and the entrenched interests within the U.S. government. However, the division between Giuliani and Patel suggested that the movement was far from united. As both men voiced their frustrations, it became clear that the vision for what the movement should look like was not shared by all. Giuliani's calls for aggressive action against the FBI and his insistence on pursuing a more combative, confrontational approach resonated with a segment of Trump's base that had grown increasingly disillusioned with the political system. This group saw the FBI as a direct threat to their vision of America and felt that figures like Giuliani were the ones to take the fight to the heart of the government. On the other hand, Patel's approach focused on maintaining the integrity of the FBI and working within its institutional framework, appealed to those who believed that the government had to be reformed from within, rather than destroyed. For these individuals, Patel represented a more measured and practical approach, one that would not jeopardize national security or the functioning of critical government institutions. This divide highlighted a significant tension within Trump's base. Should the movement seek total upheaval, or should it focus on reforming the system from within? The disagreement between these two men also underscored a broader issue within the Republican Party. As the party continued to shift to the right in response to Trump's populist appeal, the question of how to deal with the FBI, the deep state, and other perceived enemies of the movement became a point of contention. Giuliani's calls for direct action against the FBI reflected the more radical elements of the party, while Patel's focus on stability and security was a reminder of the more traditional conservative priorities that still held sway within certain factions of the GOP. This tension also had significant implications for the future of Trump's political legacy. His movement, once seen as a unified force for change, was now facing internal battles that could weaken its long-term viability. The rift between Giuliani and Patel was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of fragmentation that had been occurring within the Republican Party since Trump's departure from office. As different factions of the party vied for control of the direction it should take, figures like Giuliani and Patel became symbolic of the larger struggle for the soul of the GOP. For Trump, the feud between these two men was a reminder of the challenges he faced in maintaining loyalty within his ranks. While Giuliani had been a key ally during the early days of Trump's presidency, his public break with Patel and his increasingly erratic behavior created a dilemma for the former president. Trump had always valued loyalty, but loyalty in this context was complicated. As his allies turned on each other, it became increasingly difficult for Trump to navigate the competing factions within his movement. The media continued to play a significant role in amplifying the divide. While conservative outlets rallied behind Giuliani's criticism of Patel, liberal media outlets focused on the growing chaos within Trump's circle. This constant media attention kept the feud at the forefront of the political discourse, preventing any of the figures involved from moving beyond the conflict. As the public continued to scrutinize the feud, it became clear that the political consequences would extend beyond just these two men. The very nature of political loyalty, power, and strategy within Trump's movement was now in question. In the midst of this, Patel's position at the FBI remained tenuous. While he had managed to maintain his leadership role, the pressure from Giuliani and other Trump loyalists was mounting. Many within the FBI saw Patel as an effective leader who had managed to restore professionalism and stability to the agency. However, to Trump's base, his inability to take action against what they perceived as politically motivated investigations made him a target of their frustrations. The FBI, under Patel's direction, continued to focus on national security issues, with the agency taking a relatively neutral stance on the political disputes surrounding Trump. For some, this was exactly what the agency needed to do: stay out of the political fray and focus on its core mission. But for others, especially Trump's most vocal supporters, it was a clear indication that the FBI had not truly reformed itself and was still operating with a political agenda. In the end, the feud between Rudy Giuliani and Kash Patel was more than just a personal spat. It was a reflection of the deep divisions within American politics, particularly within the Republican Party and Trump's movement. As these divisions played out in the public eye, they exposed In the end, the feud between Rudy Giuliani and Kash Patel was more than just a personal spat. It was a reflection of the deep divisions within American politics, particularly within the Republican Party and Trump's movement. As these divisions played out in the public eye, they exposed the ongoing struggle over the future direction of the country. The outcome of this battle, whether it would lead to further fragmentation or eventual reconciliation, would have lasting consequences not just for the Republican Party but for the entire political landscape of the United States. The drama surrounding the FBI, the deep state, and the future of Trump's legacy would continue to shape the political narrative for years to come. As figures like Giuliani and Patel fought for control of the story, one thing remained clear: the ideological divide within the country was deeper than ever before, and the battle for the future of American politics was far from over.